Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Dan is busy traveling and will be with us next time. I want to just thank people because a lot of people that are listeners and audience members are sometimes reaching out to us and say, "Oh, I have a guest," or "I have something to say." We really appreciate you reaching out to us. Just so you know, we usually plan quite far ahead with our guests, just logistics and with everybody's busy timetables. So sometimes we might not respond that rapidly, but also sometimes the topic that people are reaching out, we have already recorded or we've already done it. So just be patient and understand that we're definitely keen to get suggestions, but we're not going to, of course, interview every suggestion. So your patience and understanding is greatly appreciated. We thank you also for the comments and also the feedback. That's really important. And our LinkedIn group keeps growing. So we thank you for those that are joining our LinkedIn group. We appreciate that. Well, today we're going to talk about, and my guest, while we were just chatting before, was saying it's a bit of a dry subject, accreditation and school inspections. But I think we're going to prove you wrong because I think, as we know, when you're an international school, often there needs to be some form of evaluation, assessment, or inspection. And there are a lot of different words used pending the schools, because what parents want to know that, of course, you have your international school, you have your mission and values, but it's always helpful to have an outside organization that's neutral that kind of gives you a stamp of approval saying you meet X amount of standards and that there's a guarantee of these things happening in the school at a certain level, and an outside authority that might be endorsed by a government or by multiple other nonprofit organizations are endorsing what you're doing. And it's important for schools to be accredited and have those schools inspections. And when you look at websites of schools, they will often have Council of International Schools, they have NEASC, WASC, or they might have some British inspection accreditation organizations that I'm less familiar with, but our guest is going to share in depth about that. And that's kind of a stamp of approval. It means that you've basically met a certain level and standard. And this is an iterative process. This happens periodically, sometimes every 5 years, 4 years. It depends on the accreditation or the inspection. But this is really an important part of schools really demonstrating their quality, what they're doing, and really living by their mission and their school learning principles and their values. It's kind of having an outside person saying, we're just checking in on you to make sure what you say you do, you're actually doing. It can be a very rich process for the school and the educators because you do a lot of self-reflection. You go through what you believe and the curriculum and the facilities and the operations. And it's a great opportunity to kind of look through that lens with the tools that these organizations give you to really self-reflect and see where can we enhance, how can we always amplify and do better. And I think with any organization and any industry, the idea of self-reflection and looking inwards and really looking where can you do better, where could you amplify, where might be areas for improvement is a very important process. We ask our children to do it in schools. We, of course, ask them to reflect and grow, and we give them feedback, and based on the feedback, they adjust and try to improve or enhance their learning experiences and their learning journeys and the artifacts that they share with us. So today, I have the pleasure of having Graeme Chisholm, who's the co-director at the Riverside School in Prague. And Riverside School is one of the big international schools in Prague. It has a long history and has a fantastic reputation. And they are an international school, and they cater to 3 to 18-year-olds. And Graeme is actually coming not to talk about his school, even though he might use the filter of his school to talk about these accreditations inspections, but he volunteers for CIS and NEASC and also works with British inspection accreditation organizations. And we're going to kind of dig into this and understand what does this mean, and he can share some of his own personal anecdotes. Graeme, a real pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you just came back from an accreditation in India, so you're kind of hot off the press having done this. So there's very likely some great anecdotes. And Dan is with us. Dan, I thought you were traveling, but no, you're here. It's wonderful to see you. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm fantastic, John. Great, Graeme. Great to see you. I'm actually going to be at the school in about 2 hours from now, so I might even see you in person. But yeah, thanks very much. Sorry for the delay, guys. I had something that ran over today, but I'm better late than never. So sorry about that.
Great. So, Graeme, please maybe just frame your role in the accreditations and kind of who you are a bit.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Graeme Chisholm and I am from Scotland. So I will try to make myself as clear as possible. So I may be speaking quite slowly so that people can understand.
Nobody understands me, Graeme. So you're 100% 10 times ahead of me already before you even start. So
yeah, thanks, Dad. I appreciate that. We can narrow our audience down significantly within the first few minutes. I've had the pleasure of working at Riverside International School for 20 years, and when I first arrived here as a younger school, we didn't have an inspection body or an accreditation body that we were involved with. So I've seen the process of a school growing up, joining a school that was in a very good position, but really looking at the benefits of that external validation as being quite a central part to school development. So it's of interest to me. And I am by no means an expert. I'm not employed by any association, by any inspection or accreditation association, but I am very involved both as a volunteer and as a school that is heavily involved in being self-assessed. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic to discuss.
Thank you, Graeme. So one of the things I think, our audience is international schools, and there are many different flavors. There are some that are more North American centric. Some might be more Southern Hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and some might be more the UK. So they're different terms. So one thing is there's the word accreditation, and if CIS and NEASC and WASC get involved, that's the term you would say. We're going through an accreditation process. But I know for UK-based international schools that look to the UK, they talk about inspections. Maybe you can kind of explain the difference between those two.
Well, yeah, I will try to. I'll try to explain it without putting myself into a political situation here. I think,
no politics on the podcast.
I think the British schools overseas have done a lot of work to try to frame their process less to be inspection-like. We used to have the kind of phrase of hide and seek whenever an inspection comes, and they're trying to promote really now a more open and transparent and more self-reflective process. As far as the accreditation goes, my experience is more so with NEASC and joint accreditations with the Council of International Schools, and their focus is more so on their framework or rubric, where a school self-assesses themselves and the visiting team really validate their self-reflections and then gives that advice against the rubric to say, maybe you're stronger at this than you think. Maybe there's areas here that you haven't actually focused on that you might want to consider for the future. So there is now more of a compliance aspect to CIS and NEASC, where the British schools overseas is very much about compliance so that you get the stamp of approval from the UK. If you go on a NEASC or CIS accreditation, they will tell you 5, 10, 15 times, this is not an inspection. This is not a set of criteria that a school has to get to immediately. This has got nothing to do with your school. It's a journey that a school is on that you're there to validate and to contribute to with a small snapshot that you receive with the visit, but also really taking into consideration the self assessment that they've done about themselves, and reading that and making sure that you have quite an in-depth view of the school from what they say they are, from who they say they are, from the unique aspects that school will focus on, particularly in their unique international context. And we know that each country has a different context, and a school will adapt to that. So there are many similarities. I think there are more similarities now than before between, say, a British inspection and NEASC and CIS, but there are still very, I would say, very different approaches still to how that's achieved, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes absolute sense. And I think what's interesting is that you're saying that maybe historically they were quite different, but now it's far more similar. And this idea of self-reflection and this idea of using a rubric. So this rubric is what you self-reflect upon. Are the British schools also working with a rubric? Is that the same structure?
No, and that's where it changes slightly, and it is more compliance based, and they will come out with basically statements to whether you're meeting the standards, or whether with the British schools overseas, whether you have an outstanding rating, or a satisfactory rating, or a good rating. So they'll look at the leadership and governance. They'll look at the pupils, the education. They'll look at the school's physical, mental well-being side of it. They'll look at safeguarding from the British schools overseas, and they're really making sure that as a British school, we are compliant with the standards that are based in the UK, and they will rate those headings against their written standards and say, where are you? Are you demonstrating a good level, a satisfactory level, or an outstanding level within these 4 different sections, basically. They've just actually reviewed these sections, the British government. So maybe to go back to the history of it, that there are 4 associations that can come and inspect the British schools overseas, and that's Penta, ISI, Cambridge, and I've taken some notes, and the Educational Development Trust. And the UK Department for Education, they ensure with Ofsted that they effectively monitor the schools, and that we are deemed really we have the full authority to act as a British school outside of the UK. So that gives an important benchmark as a school associated with Britain, whether it use the curriculum that demonstrates that the values are similar. And it shows to parents that if they're going to join Riverside International School or another British school, that we are in line with the top education in the UK. And then to go with that, there will be a published report that anyone can access, that we should and must have on our website, and it will show whether the school is satisfactory against the UK standards, good against the standards, or outstanding against those standards. So you can see that it's a stressful process to go through, because you're actually being rated.
Yes, absolutely.
Graeme, could I ask about, you mentioned Ofsted, and that's obviously, just saying Ofsted will put the fear into heart of anyone who's worked in a school in the UK. And I'd say not a very popular organisation, quite honestly. I'm not in the UK, so I can say that without fear of retribution. But obviously with Ofsted, a team comes in, it just happens. You get very little warning, and they're all in there. What the 4 bodies you mentioned, what kind of level is it compared to Ofsted? Clearly, it's not that level of that hard. That much coming on, but how would you compare it to someone who's been through an Ofsted inspection from an international school perspective?
I would say that it's definitely a friendlier approach, because there are.
It couldn't be less friendly, I don't think.
Yeah, I think I've read and continue to read a lot about Ofsted, and I think the mental health pressures it puts on the leadership in the UK, and make no mistake, that trickles down to the staff, and that then trickles down to the students. And most of what I've read is, what is the impact, and what is the purpose of these inspections, and what is the impact on the whole school? And I think they are reviewing that in the UK. The difference, Dan, would be that we get to choose which association comes out, or provider basically gets to come out. So Riverside has chosen Penta International, and I would say about Penta, they communicate very well with us, and they give us, they tell us their schedule, and we work on the best week that they can come out. And by that, not the best week, to get the best lessons together. It's really about, we've got events coming up here, we've got trips to Spain, we've got trips to Germany, we've got this happening. When can they come in to take a deep dive into the school when everyone's here and the conditions are most effective for them and for us? So that pre-warning is well in advance. We write a self-evaluation against the British standards. They will read that, they will look at that. We don't rate ourselves, but they come in to look at the evidence, and then they basically unpack our evidence through what they observe in the school. So that is much more helpful. It's far more transparent. Their communication is good with us, and they want to form that relationship to say that we are not coming to hammer you. We're not going to come to make your life more difficult, but we're here to be a helping piece of advice. Of course, it is stressful, and it is. It's an extremely challenging experience, but it's helpful at the same time.
Graeme, so if I'm thinking about CIS and NEASC, as you were mentioning, it sounds like it's very similar. In other words, you have a dialogue, it's transparent, you do a self-evaluation, and then they come and look at that. And it's, again, very much finding an appropriate time where they're going to be able to deep dive into the school. So it sounds like there's a lot of similarity. Maybe the difference is at the end, you're not getting this rating.
Yeah, and I think that, to be quite honest, is that is the scary part as an administrator. Riverside is rated as outstanding in all areas, and that is great. But what happens if we don't get that rating next time? Does it mean that I have failed the school, that our teachers have failed the school? I think every year we can demonstrate that the school is improving, and the real point of the accreditations should be about continual school improvement. We choose, and international schools will choose to pay a great deal of money to join an association and to ask them to come out and to accredit or inspect a school. We can survive without it, but it's not ideal, and it doesn't show that the school is committed to self-improvement and that external validation. So it's where they have changed slightly, CIS and NEASC, is that NEASC has an ACE protocol that some schools will go through, and they do that more so without CIS, but they can work together. And the trips I do, they will work on the ACE protocol. They will work on elements of that, but it's basically a joint accreditation. But
what is the ACE protocol? Can you tell us?
The ACE it stands for Learning Architecture, Learning Culture, and Learning Ecology, and it's a deep dive again into several aspects of a school. I have it written down somewhere. It's learning purpose, dimensions, evidence of learning, learning perspectives, learning autonomy, research, reflection, action, governance and leadership, inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging, learning space, so facilities, and learning community well-being. And where in the UK they've expanded their approach to meet some similar headings as well. The difference between NEASC and CIS is that CIS have similar headings. I'm going to just read them. They're called domains instead of learning principles. Their domains are purpose, direction, governance and ownership, curriculum, teaching and assessment, well-being, staffing, facilities, premises, community and home partnerships, and then residential. So you can see a crossover there. And when schools decide, like Riverside does, to have a joint accreditation of NEASC and CIS, they will use one framework. and they generally use the CIS framework.
So, Graeme, can I just ask? So you are doing both the PEN. I hope I'm naming it right. The British PEN accreditation plus NEASC and CIS. So you're doing it 3. Why would a school do 3? Or actually, I'm sorry, CIS and NEASC is combined. Why would you do 2 different ones? What's the thinking of school administrators or schools when they do that?
Social proof, I would guess.
Yeah, it's to make our schools suffer, make our staff suffer terribly, probably, which might be. No, so the Penta, we chose the British schools overseas because when we are recognised as a school, as a British school, it opens up a lot of doors for us. For example, A, we're recognised by the British government. B, it gives us that external validation that we have the highest quality of British education. C, it means that we can do certain things like we can, for early career teachers, teachers who have just completed their degrees, we can validate the next steps of their journey so that they can get their teacher status because we've been accredited as if we're a school in the UK, for example.
Got it. That makes sense.
We've also had student teachers come across, and to an extent, you feel some of those small benefits of being in the UK, where what we say is validated.
Can you verify students for their PGCE now for the teaching component? Is that because I know it wasn't possible outside the UK at one point, but now I believe it is. Is that right?
That's correct, and we can and we do. So we do have some staff members who are outstanding but do not have qualifications. They are not teaching. They will be in a class supporting. They're not employed as teachers, but they have the potential to be outstanding. So we have a company called ISTIP, who again, they're not inspectors, but they validate our capacity to put student teachers or training teachers, through the process. And again, they've given us a very high rating to say that the process is outstanding at the school. And we have a dedicated staff member who has to be from the UK that has ISTIP training or that training to put the newly qualified teachers or people going through their postgrads through the process. And that really it's good for our staff to have a pathway to furthering their education. It's good for us to keep our best staff, and it's good for our existing staff to develop professionally and to become mentor teachers for the new teachers.
Yeah,
to be qualified for that. So it provides a kind of a system of developing teachers both already here and those who want to be extended.
It's interesting. I know, John. Like I've seen, obviously, at various sort of ed tech conferences and things, you see there's various bodies offering like teacher certification abroad. There's a few American ones offering it at various states, and the Canadian ones I've seen. There's at least one. We'll put a link to this ISTIP in case any schools are interested. But it's kind of a real demand, isn't it? Because a lot of people work overseas and they get a job at an international school, but they're not a qualified teacher. They want to do it, and I think these pathways are really interesting. Like years ago, I did the PGCEI, which is like kind of an international. It's not a PGCE, but it's what people did overseas when they wanted to work for school and they were already overseas. But I think there's a lot more options available now for people to actually get like a US state accreditation or a UK accreditation.
Yeah, that's right. And then they'll do their training at Riverside as well. So we'll put them through a teaching practice here, which is it's a great opportunity for them.
Definitely. I think also in Australia and New Zealand, some universities are doing that because you have educators from all over the world. So I think that's great. Graeme, so what is the value added? So you've done the British, you get those connections and the accreditation, the inspection, and also that contact with the US government. You can actually help teachers get their qualification, have a mentor program, which is fantastic. So what is the value added of having CIS and NEASC also part of your ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. Their approach, because it's slightly different than the UK. The UK is every 3 years, and NEASC and CIS is a 5-year process of self-evaluation, and their focus is definitely more international. and that's quite clear. So we see ourselves, and most British schools will see themselves as being, British international schools. There are some British schools that exist that may have little to no British students in their school. Yet we're, you're with the promotion of global citizenship, and looking at how to promote intercultural learning. It's very important now for all schools to look at their own unique cultural context. So the international accreditations, it provides a different lens to what we may be looking at as an international school. Again, quite a different one. NEASC allows us to provide high school diplomas to our students if they don't go through the IB. So that opens up pathways to students. But through my experience, they've always worked closely with CIS. It means that we get, an American accreditation, which is a good marketing tool for our American students. And NEASC are the oldest accreditation agency in the world. They will accredit the top universities and schools in America, but they, I think, are basically the founding provider for this. So they come in with an incredible wealth of experience and knowledge, and they have a Council for International Education that oversees the international departments, and then they work alongside, or we utilize the Council of International Schools to do a joint visit, so we get both perspectives under the same framework. We've decided to use them both together because it gives us one accreditation with two agencies. Their rubric gives an international perspective. It will add things like, in their standards, it will say, do you have a definition for global citizenship? How is this implemented? How are learning objectives documented in the written curriculum for global citizenship? And so if you, as an international school, we're not thinking about this, to go through this process, you are. And they both associations have slightly different terminologies, but they talk about your intent, your implementation, and your impact. Schools are brilliant at having intent. We want to do this, we want to do this, we want to do this. We were great with ideas. The implementation is a challenge, as we all know. And it fascinates me as the leadership at Riverside International School. We've been here for a long time, and it takes 3 years, I think, to implement a big system well. And we're lucky here because the turnover of leadership internationally is frightening. So really, to implement something properly takes us, or maybe it's just me, but it takes us a long time to do it properly. And then to look at the impact, has our intentions been evidenced through some kind of growth or some kind of measure? It ends the loop so that what you're doing is impactful and meaningful. So that's where CIS and NEASC are very, very helpful. They drive you to look at yourselves in an international context. And I know that you guys are tech people. They've got a section on digital citizenship. Again, do you have a definition? Okay, it's great that you've got a definition for that. What is it, and how is it lived? How can you find digital citizenship in the curriculum? Is ICT and is online safety and is coding, and are these areas documented? Do we assess children on it? Do we have the infrastructure to provide this type of technology? And they will come in and externally validate it. Yeah, you've got a definition. We can see it. It's lived. It's evidenced through the curriculum. It's evidenced through the practice. It's evidenced through your development plans. Or they might come in and say, you don't actually live it. There's little evidence observed. And a key area to look at for the next time is, right, how do you look at your infrastructure? How do you look at your staffing? How do you make sure that what you say against our rubric lives? So that it's a different type of challenge in the sense that You're not saying like the BSO, yes, we do this, we comply. You're saying, yeah, I think we do this, but you know what? We might be able to evidence it better, or maybe our infrastructure isn't correct. And it leads the team who write the report internally to really reflect on where you are on this journey, and to really look at future aspirations, so that you're using the framework as a self-reflective tool. So that lens is different. It evokes more deep conversation, reflection on where you are right now, knowing that in 3 years' time, the same question is going to evoke a different type of conversation, because technology will have changed dramatically. So where AI 2 years ago wasn't in the conversation, well, it is now. And in 2 years' time, it's going to be a different conversation as well. So that it's a different approach, a different lens, and a different set of expectations that keeps us internationally minded.
That's great. And I think, especially if you are a school like yours that has both a British curriculum and an international curriculum, I think that lens of global citizenship and international mindedness, those are important conversations to have, especially if, you might represent one culture, but the people within your community are multicultural. That's a great conversation, I think, to have and really reflect on that.
Oh, I think it very much is, and I think what the rubric does is it challenges us to. It challenges. They call it aspirational, and they've now, with CIS and NEASC, refer to it in the same way. If you think you've met a standard, well, let's look beyond that, and let's look at how you can make it more meaningful and more maybe globally impactful. And so you're always being challenged. It's not a tick. We've done it. An example for us would be that before the process, we had lots of evidence for global citizenship. But did we have the skills, the attributes, the learning objectives articulated well as a school, so that we can assess whether we're teaching the right things to our students? So we spent a long time auditing all the opportunities our students have in the curriculum, and then looking at the gaps, looking at we used the Oxfam framework and said, wow, they're looking at these aspects that we've not considered. What do we need to do to actually expand our learning objectives and document our process better for our students, so that we can come back and assess it? So we've developed a scope and sequence. We're really pleased with it, but now we're thinking, do we do enough about anti-racism in this scope and sequence? Maybe we don't. So we're now, as we speak, we have someone coming across from the UK who's just developed a scope and sequence for anti-racism, and we're thinking, okay, why do we expand their curriculum even further? And so that cycle of development, making sure that, again, it's not our intent, it should be really now our implementation, and then looking at the impact of it, to make sure we're always growing and supporting our students to become globally minded, but to impact the world in a positive way. And I think as we speak now, the turmoil, to our left and to our right, and when we look back and we look forward, the news is just covered with war and conflict. And I think what the international associations do is they challenge us to promote this international mindedness, so that these students can hopefully impact the world in a much more positive way than us as adults have done. So I think it's a really valuable. These associations, it couldn't be more valuable at a more valuable time.
Definitely. I think, it's a great point, Graeme. It's interesting for me because, international schools are often the first casualty of wars and conflicts. I mean, John and me both knew people at the Anglo-American school in Moscow, which has had to close down recently due to allegedly for hiring unqualified teachers, which is blatantly ridiculous, as it was the most qualified staff in all of Russia. And I know the American International School of Gaza, who I've been involved in, is actually an international school in Gaza, believe it or not. That's now obviously closed, and we don't. I know one person now. I'm not sure what's happened to them. So I think obviously it's. I think they add a lot to these communities, and it's always a shame when anything like that happens. And
I think what's interesting, Graeme, what you were saying is that I think we underestimate the kind of the ethical responsibility we have to really instill in our students the idea of tolerance, anti-racism, equity, because the chances are most of, let's be honest, a lot of the communities that we serve as international educators are much wealthier and will tend to maybe get into positions of power where they will have an impact and they will be in rooms making decisions for hundreds of other people. And I think what you're bringing up is this idea of really making sure we can say we do all this, but where is the evidence? Where does the rubber hit the road? Where do
Exactly.
we know that a child's going to actually use different language when they're in a conflict? They're going to refer to tolerance over maybe emotional reaction. And I think we underestimate that. And I think that's why the work that you're describing is so important, because I think, as you said, 360 degrees around us, there's a lot of not happy things happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, whatever we can do, we might not have done the greatest job as adults, but what we can do is instill this idea and these ideals, but more than ideals, behaviors and understandings to maybe hopefully change that. So I really appreciate
Yeah.
you highlighting how the intent is easy. It's really the impact and kind of where's the granularity? Where do you actually see evidence in that day to day in the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I must stress, that, where I think Riverside's in a good position, we can always improve, and that self-reflection, is absolutely key. Schools are great at having International Day and things like that, but it's far more than that now. I would, if I may, also add the benefits both of the British and of NEASC and CIS. That is, I think, is now at the forefront, is their commitment to safeguarding, and I think that's really a great advantage of going through this system. With Britain, they have a document called Keeping Children Safe in Education, and it's, to my knowledge, is one of the most thorough reviews on how schools and colleges should provide training and policy to ensure that their schools are safe. I don't know of another document that is reviewed annually by the government that is more comprehensive. It's an outstanding document. So that's a great guide for us as a school. What the NEASC and the Council of International Schools do, they look at it with an international lens again. So there is if you go into one of the advantages of being associated with the international organizations is that they give you a lot of support. There's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of information out there. The International Task Force for Child Protection has influence from NEASC, CIS, COBIS, and so on, and they're developing their own standards, so that not only do we have to comply to the British standards, but I can use the international benchmarks to evidence that are we keeping up to date with everything that's required to keep our school safe, which is absolutely imperative.
Definitely. I've actually got a question for John. Like, John, you've obviously worked a lot of schools in Asia, Africa, Europe. What's been your experience of going through these inspections or accreditations? Like, do you remember much about it, and what was it like from the point of view of someone working at the school?
I have found, and I mean, I would say initially IT was not really a focus, and that was maybe one of my frustrations. But as things have developed, they have. I found the fact that my teams would get together and we would have to do some self-reflecting, that in itself was a really healthy conversation. And to be honest, very likely we would do it on our own, but having somebody from the outside knocking on the door, you're like, okay, we can't really avoid this. There's a timeline, there's a rubric, there's this tool. So absolutely. No, I think it's a really important process. I think sometimes the agility of these organizations in being able to adapt the accelerated change and the way things, I'll be very curious to see how these accreditation and inspection organizations deal with AI. And, what does that mean? And, those kind of things. I know that diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion, and anti-racism, and the child safeguarding all have come in over the years. And that's been fantastic. But I just think sometimes you need somebody to kind of pinch you on the shoulder and say, come on, you need to do some self-reflecting, and that process in itself. And then that they're physically people coming to you, to your school, walking around your campus, asking questions. I mean, of course, there's always cynicism, but I think the intent and really what does happen, those conversations really highlight opportunities to say, you know what, we could do this better. Or, wow, we didn't think of that. So I think it's been a very positive experience in my time as a school administrator, working with WASC, CIS, and NEASC. I've not had the opportunity of working with the British organizations, but I imagine it's the same. I think, Graeme, what would be interesting is that you just came back from India. So one thing that you told us at the beginning, you're a volunteer. So you have a full-time job, you're a school administrator, you're co-director of a big international school, and then you decide to volunteer to do this. Why?
Well, it's a good question, and I am not a gifted writer, so it seemed like an enormous punishment when I go out to these schools. The school I was in, I was with a group of 7 poets that my self-esteem was not at the height. I think one of the keys for me as a leader is to make sure that my leadership go on to these visits. We have leadership that are that volunteer for Penta. One of our staff members is going out in 2 weeks' time. 2 of our staff members just came back 2 weeks ago from CIS visits. One of them will go out again on an NEASC visit soon. It's really important for professional development. Having a deep dive into a different school, looking at their policies, their procedures, their practices. We actually have a form that we have our staff fill out when they come back from these visits to say, what did you learn and what could we learn as a school? And we've nicked some wonderful ideas, but also a lot of the time it provides affirmation towards what we're doing as well. So I can't think, when you get into a certain level of leadership, I can't really think of better professional development to have our staff go out and to really unpack how a different school lives and breathes, and then to come back and say, right, this school did this in a way that I've not seen before. Can we explore that here? And that process it's incredible. So yeah, we volunteer, we don't get paid. They will pay for your flights, accommodation, their food. It's very expensive for schools to accommodate a team. If you think of 8 people's flights, accommodation, and food, and transfers, and so on, and visas, it's a massive undertaking for a school to do. But it's for us, it's very important professional development.
I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of people don't think of it as professional development, and obviously, especially for your leadership, I think I've never thought of it like that, but it could be phenomenal professional development. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this who maybe would like to go and do inspections and accreditations for one of the bodies we've discussed. Like, what would you advise them? Let's say it's not coming from their own director. They want to do it themselves. They want to become an inspector. Like, how would you recommend they start? Which association to look at? How would they get into that?
It's a good question. I think it's a very good question. I think they should definitely speak through their, whatever channel they have for professional development, whatever channel they have for appraisal, and for their own review of how they're developing. For us at Riverside, to tell the truth, I'm looking at staff who are outstanding teachers, outstanding leaders. I'm looking at that extra where they can get challenged themselves, where they can go through the process of self-reflecting while providing advice or to a different school. I'm looking at leaders who can not just represent themselves, but they're ambassadors to Riverside. When they go out, our school is more visible when our staff go and do a great job. So I would say that if you're a teacher and when you're at the stage of saying, the appraiser's saying, I'm not quite sure what I can do now to push you forward. I would definitely advise that this is a great avenue, both for the school and for the individuals. The avenues are quite clear. We plan to host a Riverside Penta training. We'll probably do that in January for level 1 and level 2 training. So that's for the British schools overseas. There's some training taking place next week with Penta, I think in the Middle East. So people can sign up for those trainings. The Council of International School, they provide training that it's online. It's very, very well organised as well. I participated in that training. It's over a month. You can still work and participate in this training in your own time, but very comprehensive training. And NEASC provide training too. So I'd really advise that, if you're a keen educator that wants to be developed in a different way and want to contribute to your school, then you find an avenue to do that.
Great.
I love the fact that you're saying, you give this scenario where you're appraising a colleague as their leader, and then you're saying, okay, we've kind of given you everything here, but I think the next step would be for you to give back. And as you give back, you're also going to maybe self-reflect and get affirmed what you're doing, or maybe find some new things. And I think that's really powerful, the way you describe that, because I think there is something about giving to other people, and in the process, as you give and you interact, I think you learn. And in the process of giving, I think there's so much to be said about that.
I couldn't agree with you more, John. I think with the team I just came back from, there were 2 highly trained, PYP, MYP members. There was someone else that is friends with John Hattie, who, the guru of international school research or educational research, and even from just general conversations around the dinner table and in the mornings, you come back with an expanded knowledge of education. And, I now have a ton of new websites and different resources just through their own internal team conversations. So I think the richness of conversation that you can have with your staff who have gone on that visit is deeper. And I think often you're only as good as you think you are, but to have that external experience, it just provides a different level of conversation.
Great.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead, Dan. No, go ahead.
No, John, you go first. I've got a slightly different point.
Okay, what I was wondering was, and I really liked, is that you say when you have your staff going out and they come back, you actually kind of mine for learning that they had, which I think is great, because often, you go on these visits and you come back and you kind of melt into the landscape of your school. And I just want to highlight that, because I think, that is really helpful, like even a little Google form or whatever you use, just to aggregate that data, because that might actually be something then you can use. So hats off to you for doing that, Graeme.
No, yeah, not at all. It's all, everything that we do is about improvement, and the job of the leaders is to make sure that the improvement plans are manageable and that we have the capacity to do it, that we can prioritize the big changes that we want. But, a school, the only consistent element of a school is of a good school is change. So mining any opportunity for change is good, but it has to be managed, of course.
Great. I had one final closing thing. We haven't really mentioned the IB yet. Obviously, you do the diploma program at Riverside. John, you've been involved in a lot of, you work at the home of the IB now, International School of Geneva, where it was invented.
That's correct.
So, what's that? Just quickly, what's the IB process? Do they do an inspection, or do you have to get accredited at the beginning and then recertify?
Well, I'm sure, John, you'll keep me accountable to the terminologies here, but a lot of schools will they'll mention their associations with examination or curriculum boards that will come across, and they're slightly different than accreditation or inspection groups. And it's good that you asked that, Dan, because there is a difference between both those groups. For example, the Cambridge international examinations and IB and the Pearsons and the IPC and so on, they will look at specifics, our capacity to run the IB program, and so they will come and inspect that curricular aspect to say, can you do that? They will be inspected to say whether we can or cannot have the facilities for inspection to make sure, for our examination, to make sure that our conditions are right for that. So we are, and they will come across and they will go through that process with Riverside, as they do for the thousands of schools that follow whether the full IB or the IB diploma, to make sure that the conditions are correct for that. But schools may decide, again, they've got choice to look at those other types of bodies who provide an element of inspection, but not to make the distinction, not the full accreditation or inspection process. At Riverside, we use a lot. Obviously, we go through IB. We've chosen to be associated with COBIS, the Council of British International Schools. They have a route as well, I believe. We also have Adventure Mark from the UK, and as a school who has one of our priorities is outdoor adventure, we bring across a group so they train our staff and inspect our practices so that we know that we're safe for these events. Adventure Mark is the same. We have a strong element on the PE and Skills for Life, and they come to give us that advice on that specific area. That's the same with the Duke of Edinburgh, that they will give us advice and so on. So there's lots of different types of associations who give elements of inspection, IBO being one example, but not the full inspection. And so they are very different, but they are also very, very valuable, depending again on your priorities as a school.
Fantastic. Yeah. Great. Well, Graeme, this has been so rich of a conversation, and thank you for kind of navigating us through the terms and also the experiences and how schools, as you were demonstrating, can really leverage this experience to their advantage, not only by giving out, but receiving back in. And I think that's always important. Adam Grant has this wonderful book called Give and Take. And a friend of mine asked me to read it about 10 years ago, maybe longer. And I just can't agree more. The more you give, the more you learn. It's not always about taking.
Yeah,
and that really resonated as you talked about your experience and your knowledge about this topic. Graeme, just any parting thoughts, if you're thinking of school leaders or educators, often accreditation and inspection, as Dan says, brings a certain amount of dread. What could we say to lighten the load or kind of make them think that actually there's something special about this?
I would say that the best compliment you can get as a school is just to be a reflective school, anyway. Whether you're coming from a British angle, whether you're coming from NEASC or CIS, the best schools already are reflecting on the key areas of their school. They already have, using internal and external data, systems documented to show that they are trying to improve. They already have staff who are interested in new advances in technology and in global citizenship, in well-being and in safeguarding, that they are documenting to say we are trying to improve. And those, keep on doing that. And as long as you have that philosophy, any accreditation or inspection agent will come and verify the fact that you have a clear pathway and a clear understanding of what change that you want to make for your school. And they will always be impressed by that, because the best schools are the forward-thinking schools and the schools that acknowledge the fact that change is good and change is a constant. And whichever agency come to see you are verifying that same thing, just with a different lens. So keep on being reflective, keep on looking for change, keep on trying to improve what the great jobs that you're doing, and any external person, agency should recognise that.
Thank you, Graeme. That's wonderful. I just want to remind our audience, Graeme has been very kind in the show notes, put a little bio and some links. And also, if you want to get in touch with him, you can. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk. But definitely check out the show notes. And Graeme, thank you so much. I think you're going to bump into Dan here in a few minutes as he goes and picks up his 2 children.
Yeah, well, funnily enough,
and,
John, Graeme and my son are actually in the same class. So we've
fantastic.
got I got my first parent-child review. I forgot the name of it. Sorry, over there tonight. So I'm going to be there.
It's okay, Dad. 7 minutes ago, I was actually emailing while we were talking to say that my wife isn't here yet, and someone has to collect my son. Thankfully, that's been resolved. So Dan, don't worry, we're in the same boat.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Graeme, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you so much, and all the best with your school community.
Thank you for your time. All right. Thanks. Take care now.